with the theme being taken in Ohio, I approached it, to the extent of, can I imagine that photo representing Ohio? I didn't want to think of it like in a literal sense of, was the photo actually taken in Ohio, but more of, does that photo represent Ohio as, a state that we would think of when we would look at a photograph? Can I imagine picturing that image in Ohio? And so this, there are almost 20 battles fought over many years, in Ohio. With this reenactment here, I really could imagine that this, was something that took place in Ohio. Let's see, the period dress here, I feel, helps to really tell a story. I like that the focus is on the people in the foreground here. And with this being shot at f8, it helps that the soldiers in the background are kind of blurred out a little bit. You get that separation between the foreground group and the background group, but you're still really able to see and understand what's going on in the background. You can get that feeling that these people were discussing this event, as they're standing there witnessing it firsthand. One of the things where I ended up moving this to honorable mention was I really wish that the elbows on these two outside people were inside the frame and not cut off, just like they are there. And I really like the color and the tones in this image. The one thing I thought was that the lady in pink seemed a little red, and maybe a localized white balance adjustment on her skin tone might help to make her look a little more natural. I don't know if she was really that red in person, but there's a lot of other red in here that looks relatively natural, so that might be accurate to her skin tone. But doing something like that's an easy local adjustment in Lightroom. Yeah, aside from the skin tone, the colors are rich and vibrant here.
Okay, you want to move on now?
Okay.
An honorable mention, State of Ohio by Mark Foll.
Yeah, so here we have, taken in Ohio to the literal extreme. We actually see the state of Ohio in this photo. And I really like, the representation of the cornfield is something that, is very common as you're driving throughout the Ohio countryside. You often do see power lines, strewn across the countryside as well. Although I didn't feel like the power lines in this image really added a whole lot, and felt like they could have easily been removed through a local adjustment. I also noted there's a few dust spots on the sensor here and here, which would have been easily cloned out in Lightroom. And one thought I had in this image was it would be nice to be slightly more elevated, so you were seeing just over the top of the corn to give it that real depth to it. But I really do love the green and the yellows contrasted with the blue sky with the clouds. And I like that the corn's going across on the diagonal, as opposed to being a straight on shot. The state of Ohio is lined up over here toward the third line to help give the sense of balance to the image. So overall, a really nice image. Look at my notes and see if I left anything out here. Power lines. Yeah. Okay. Zoom bars in my, there we go.
Okay, this is Old One Room School by Marcia Savage.
So here again, I felt this really fit with the theme well of taken in Ohio. If you drive around the Ohio countryside, you see a lot of buildings like this, schools, barns, in various states of disrepair. This one really taken to the extreme where it's halfway collapsed already. I love the color tones on the barn, the faded red paint. I really like that the barn is set off to the side a little bit and not centered in the frame. The color and the tone in the background and the trees is nice. You've got the autumn colors starting to come through there with the oranges and the reds. The one thing I felt this image could benefit from, as Donna was mentioning, replacing the sky, is doing a potential sky replacement on this image. The sky that day looks like it was very monotone, very one note. You know, and it would probably be a pretty easy sky replacement to do on this image. Which also brought up another thing in my own photography. I often see a scene that I like, but recognize that the conditions that day just aren't quite perfect for the photograph I want to take. So I'll make a note of where that scene is, you know, grab a GPS point or something, you know, and throw it in my phone and keep it for later and watch for the conditions where, you know, you've got that perfect sky. So you don't have to do the sky replacement. You go back and visit that scene on another day, you know, and then you can take that picture in camera just the way you really envisioned it in your mind being. So that's really two schools of thought is, you know, you can do it in post-processing, or you can wait for the time when you can get the scene as a single image just the way you really wanted to get it. But overall, I really love this image. You know, the colors.
Quick question, because
Yep.
Mark asked this, but I was curious too. This is a really cool shot. Where was this taken? I'm not quite sure if whose photograph it was again, if they're here.
It's Marcia Savage's photo.
Is Marcia here?
Yeah. That is south of Martinsburg. I can't think offhand the route. We took 62, and when you got to Martinsburg, you turned to the right, and it was, you know, just down there, the middle of nowhere. But it was in Licking County, south of Martinsburg.
Very cool. I think we're all going to be going there. I think we need an outing. Okay. Just had to ask that. Nice picture, Marcia. Okay.
I know two people that have that same photo. So that's a great old building.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I had seen it, somebody else had posted it on Facebook, and I asked them where it was, and they told me. And so the next good day, my husband and I drove and hunting it and found it, and pulled off into just a grassy area kind of to the left of that, even farther, and parked. And I went, while he sat and watched, I went and shot it.
Well, thank you. Ken, do you want to continue then?
Yep. Yes. Okay. Sorry, I was just reading the chats there. Yeah, I really love the textures and the tones in this one. It's a really great image. All right. Here is.
This is Clifton Mills by Ted Stone.
Okay, that is all of them. Okay. Yes. Here again, you know, very obviously taken in Ohio. I think Clifton Mill is probably one of the most well-known mills in terms of being photographed, especially when you start talking about the Christmas lights that you can actually see on the roof there in this photo. I love the arrangement of the mill in this case. I like the color being nice rich green contrasted with the red, and then the nice blue sky with the white puffy clouds. You know, it really was a beautiful day for that. The gentlemen on the porch here are a little dark. I would consider possibly raising the shadows in this area just a little bit to bring them out of the shadows some. And it feels like this edge over here is leaning slightly to the left. You know, I might have moved this one up a little bit more if the building had been straightened just a touch. And then the only other real criticism I had was the piece of the roof here in the foreground getting cut off on the top. Looked at the EXIF data on this. It was shot at 18 millimeters. So I'm guessing that that's the widest this lens on this camera would go, was 18 millimeters. That's a pretty common focal length for the wide open side. So if there was not the opportunity to move back a step, maybe raising it up just a touch would have kept that little bit in the frame.
Yeah, if you've been there, actually, I shot through a window, so you were limited, you know, where you could move.
I figured that was the case. Yeah, I've been there before, but I couldn't remember the exact position of this, where this was taken from.
Yeah,
And I
there's
was thinking that it was restricted in terms of moving back.
yeah, there's a bridge, you know, going
Yep.
across the water there, and there's windows on that bridge where you can, you know, take your picture.
Yeah. If you had a 16 or a 14 millimeter, you probably could have gotten
It was,
all of
yeah,
the
I was
building in
using a
there.
wide angle lens, but
Yeah. Yeah, but it's a really nice image overall. It's strong, it's well grounded.
that whole area of the country is just beautiful.
It is. Yeah, it's, oh, the one other thought I had was if you could have extended the exposure up to maybe a half second to 1 full second, you could have
Oh.
gotten that nice look on the water here. Was there
Mhm.
the opportunity to use a tripod where you were?
No,
Yeah,
you had it on a window.
right. Maybe use a monopod, and if you push the monopod and lean it against the frame of the window, you can probably get it sturdy enough to take about a half second exposure.
Well, I could have, you know,
And then you get that nice smoothed out water look
right.
on the water coming down here. But yeah, overall, really nice shot, Ted.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, this is 5th place. This is After Sunset by Kathy Wagner.
Yeah, so on this image, oh man, I've got my monitor's 4K, so if it looks a little blurry, that's probably my monitor's fault. Because it looked a little crisper up on the website, but now I'm in full screen here. So, oh, I'm at 450%. Oops. Back off. I bet you the image you guys sent me isn't the full resolution image, because it doesn't look quite as crisp on this screen now. Okay, so this is After Sunset. I really love the simplicity in this image. You know, that two-tone kind of look. The lack of the leaves on the branches really brings out, you know, a lot of that texture in the tree itself. I really do love taking pictures with, you know, that time of year when the leaves are not on the trees. There's actually a tree up off of 310, just south of 161. And I'm just waiting for that perfect day with a nice sunset behind it. It very much reminds me of this tree right here. It's just got the really gnarly, you know, lots of branches. I like that, you know, the other skyline still included in the image. You know, it's not so much of just tree and sky, but you can see some of the trees in the background. It gives you that feeling that this tree is really off by itself, very prominent. It makes a strong subject in the image. Yeah, the exposure is well controlled. The tone of the color is really nice and rich. It really makes it feel like a photo that was, you know, was taken in Ohio during a late fall, early winter sunset. You know, we get these really nice skies that time of year.
This is Over the River and Through the Woods, and that is mine.
So yes, this very much feels like I'm walking through an Ohio park. You know, all of our wonderful state parks throughout Ohio. On a nice foggy winter day, obviously because the snow's on the ground. The fog really kind of, you know, you can dehaze in Lightroom, you know, to get rid of that, but I really like the aura and the aura and ambiance that it gives this image. You know, it gives it a very natural feel, which is nice. I also like that the trail winds through kind of the center of the image and then comes out and across and out this bottom right corner. I really like the use of diagonals in photography, and I like grounding lines to the corners of an image. To me, it makes it feel like a stronger overall composition. I like, and I don't know if it was intentional, but I like the tree on this edge over here. You've got the trunk right here, which creates kind of a framed feel to that side of the image. Overall, a well-composed image. And I guess I'll stop here for a minute and say, there were so many great images. It was really hard to narrow these down. I actually picked more than I was supposed to initially, and had a hard time kind of whittling it down to the best ones. That in the honorable mention category, anyone, or they could have gone in any order. I just put them in, whatever order I happened to pick them out of the groups. And then I probably went through the final pick of images 4 or 5 times, and trying to place each image and figure out, which ones I really felt deserved to rise to the top. So yeah, I felt this was a nice, strong image.
This is third place, Short North Snow by Richard Marquardt.
Yeah, these last 3 really, were really wonderful images. The things I loved about this image was, I recognized the Short North right away from the arches going over the road, as well as the construction barriers that were so common down there while they were doing all that work. I loved that the road was set up on a diagonal and the man's walking with his dog on the opposing diagonal. Again, going back to what I feel, how that kind of grounds images, using the diagonals. The building over here, it just barely edges up to the frame, creating a nice edge to this side of the frame. The Short North buildings are so quintessential Ohio. They've got that old Ohio kind of feel. If you ever drive out to some, Johnstown and some of these other cities, you'll see that same type of architecture when you get in those old Ohio cities, and it just really makes you, appreciate that architecture so much. I really felt this image told a story. It's cold and it's winter, and you can see this guy walking his dog, carrying his coffee with, no gloves on his hand, and yet the snow is falling all around him. Why aren't you wearing gloves, dude? That's what I wanted to say. Wanted to ask him. You got this nice couple right behind him here coming down through, with a whole bunch of snow right in front of him. It really, well, this time of year, and given the theme taken in Ohio, it really was a great image to pick for December's contest, in my opinion. Orientation's good on the diagonal. Yeah, the man's motion of travel creates movement within the frame that helps tell that story. Oh, and then the choice of black and white here. I felt with the winter scene that the black and white was perfect. It really helped to accentuate the snow falling. And this time of year, this probably would have been a pretty gray kind of day. So the black and white really helps to make it feel almost vibrant in a way, even though it's a black and white image.
Second place, Scarlet and Gray, Ken Worm.
Yeah, so there are 88 covered bridges in Ohio. Yeah, it's not something that you think about all the time, but there's so many of them. And many of them are no longer in use, but they're still maintained. Funny story is my fiance Sophie actually saw me when I was doing the judging and said, "I have a picture of myself on that bridge." And she pulled it up on her phone and showed me. And it was from, 8 or 10 years ago. And at that time, the paint was all faded. So it looks like when this image was taken, they had just done a fresh paint job on this image, on this bridge. And that rich, vibrant red paint really stands out very strongly against this, gray sky that you can see. It looks like storm clouds are getting ready to roll in. And I really liked how that opposed with the, the yellow, not yellow, the golden hour light. You can really feel that golden hour hit right on the bridge. This was a really good, well-timed image. Going back to what I was saying earlier, about seeing a scene and trying to figure out the right time to shoot that scene. I think this did a really wonderful job of picking the perfect time with the contrasting gray clouds, but the warm golden hour light. It was really nice. The one critique I would make on this image that kind of held it back from getting first place to me was I would like to see through the bridge just a little bit more, get a little bit more of the interior architecture, maybe 2 or 3 steps to the left so that you kind of see down the bridge just a bit more, especially because that warm light is getting inside the bridge. I felt that might have made it just a little bit stronger. But overall, it was a very excellent image. Again, on the diagonals, I keep going back to that, but I really like images that accentuate, those diagonals, kind of also build on the thirds, the bridge itself, the bottom of it sitting on the 1/3, the front of it's coming over towards this third, the back of it's on the other third. So even though it's sort of centered in the frame, it's taking advantage of those relationships to build a very strong overall image.
And first place is Class Act by Frank Bagan.
Yeah, so it's funny. I've said all along about the diagonals and the thirds and this and that. And this is one of those images I just felt got to break all the rules and was still a really strong image. The duck. Can somebody help me with the species on this one? I wasn't sure. I've seen one picture of this duck. I think it is taken in Ohio. I'm pretty sure of it.
Can someone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, it's a mandarin duck. It was taken in a pond just sort of northeast of Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I've been told, there's a company, it's actually on a company, they're building property, and they got either 8 or 10 of these, 4 or 5 pairs last year. This is the only one that's remained at the pond. But it's an exotic species. It's usually in Asia.
Yeah. I thought it was not native to Ohio, but I'd seen another picture on Facebook, I think of the same duck. And they mentioned that they had taken it in Ohio.
Yeah, it's become sort of popular
your audio is breaking up there, Frank.
bird. A lot of people are down there taking pictures.
Sorry,
it's a pretty popular bird.
Yes. So the reasons why I really like this image, I felt it was a powerful image from the start, and that really kind of started with the way it's framed, on top of the fact that the duck is looking straight at you, and you can see those eyes. The wonderful detail in the feathers is really nice, and the color tones, it's natively or naturally a very rich in color species, and you really capture that color tone very nicely. Let's see. So the one thing I did note when looking at this is that it's ISO 400, and I do detect quite a bit of noise in the background here. And I saw it was taken with your D850. I believe that was a 500 millimeter lens, or at 500 millimeters that it was taken. So I was a little surprised about the noise, but it doesn't appear in the
500 millimeter lens, yeah. I was too.
Yeah, I know. Is that the Nikon 200 to 500 f5.6?
No, it's a 500 PF prime.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the tone of the water that day, but yeah.
Well, also it's enlarged a bit.
You had to crop in a bit.
So Yeah, it's cropped in. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so hard when taking images like this. I've had that same challenge. Even at 500 millimeters, it's hard to get close to some of these animals. So the one thing I would like to see, even though I made this first place, I still have a small critique, is it looks like you've got some of the reflection here. And you're mentioning you did crop in. It would be neat to see a little bit more of the reflection in front of the bird in this image. If you have that image, maybe go back and expand your crop down just a little bit and see if you have enough of the reflection there to kind of get almost that two-tone look. But even without the reflection, I really liked the overall tone. I like the way that the feathers are oriented, going to, with diagonals in the frame. They're both pointing down toward the bottom corners, and you've got the diagonals of the feathers on the wings coming up toward the back sides here. So yeah, really strong with the birds look right at the camera. Not an easy position to capture a lot of times with wildlife.
Thank you.
So
Okay.
end of the
Yeah. Do you want to move on to Scarlet now?
okay. So we're starting here.
That is honorable mention, and that is Zigzag by David Chu.
Okay, gotta find my notes. Okay, here we go. So this definitely appears to be a fire tower, taken from underneath. Very common throughout Ohio. Fire towers are scattered all across Ohio. Not used nearly as much as they used to be, but I remember as a kid traveling around Ohio and climbing a number of different fire towers. Back when they let you used to do that. I'm not sure if they still let you do that so much anymore. Let's see, so it's a different perspective taken from the ground up. It gives a much more different feel to the image. I like that the tower is offset on the diagonals as opposed to being lined up with the edges of the frame. Again, going to the diagonals toward the corners. It gives a very different feel than if the lines, these outside lines have been lined up right to the frame. Yeah, I feel like by turning it just a little bit, it really creates that sense of movement that you would get as you climbed up those stairs all the way to the top. I like that the sky is really blown out. It creates a very high key image, which draws your attention to the geometry of the frame itself. In my own photography, I have a real hard time doing high key. It's one of those things I think I struggle with. I really try to control my exposures and keep from blowing my highlights. And so naturally, I always find that pushing myself into that genre like this is really challenging. So I really appreciated how that was handled in this image. I did note that, on these girders, you can see a lot of the steel in the framework. I thought maybe if it was an option to pull the shadows up on some of these platforms to highlight a little bit more of the steel texture in the steps themselves, might have elevated this a little bit more in terms of categorization where I ranked it. Yeah, because I really appreciate, seeing those rivet heads and the different tone and texture of the steel. It feels like it's a black and white, but I see a little bit of tone in here, which makes me think it's probably still a color image, just done in that high key style. Okay.
This is Hidden in the Underground Railroad, and that's mine.
Yeah, so if you go to the Ohio Historical Society, you'll see a lot of stuff like this. I could even guess this might have been taken at the Ohio Historical Society.
It was taken at Kelton House.
Kelton House, okay. Yeah, there's a lot of historical buildings and structures across Ohio where you'll see you know, these old wooden barrels and the old trunks like this. It's really quintessential Ohio history. You know, it reminds me of my days in junior high and Ohio history class where we would talk about these kind of things. So this really fit the Taken in Ohio theme really well, I felt. I love the composition of this image. I like how the trunk in the foreground is used as a way to build layers into the frame. It takes up the first thirds of the image, basically. I like the lines over here on the right going up and down, lining up with the edge of the frame, having those shadows there. I really appreciate the the structure here of the barrel sitting on this. Again, you know, lining up kind of on that third line feels like it's a well-balanced image when taken with the other items sitting on top of the trunk. And I like in this case that the corner really has some darkness to it. It makes a really feel of light to dark as you progress through the image. It really kind of, your eye travels in and around the image and to the dark and then back to the light and then back down again. It really keeps your attention and captures you. Let me see. Yeah, okay, that's all I had. Well, I did say in my notes that I would consider bringing the shadows up a little bit because I feel like there might be a little bit of texture back there, but not so much that you would lose that kind of rotating light to dark color. Just a little bit to bring a little detail in there.
Excuse me, this is Ducklings in a Dublin Pond by Larry Kennedy.
Yeah, so my literal note was, who doesn't love some baby ducklings? This was just one of those awe kind of moments when I saw this image. I really love the expressions on the ducks' faces. You know, you get that really warm sense of feeling when you look at them. I did feel like, and it's very apparent on my screen here with the 4K monitor, that the image seemed a little soft overall. What I'm noticing now is that the reflection seems to be sharp in comparison to the dark, in comparison to the ducks themselves. It seems like it may have front focused just a little bit ahead of the ducks. It's hard to tell for sure, almost like it's on this drop of water here. You look where it lines up with down here. Yeah, and again, getting baby ducks as they're swimming across the pond, they're obviously in motion here. You can tell by the wake of the water in front of them. It's pretty challenging because they're constantly moving, and in this case, moving directly toward the focal point of the camera. Let's see. Back off there just a bit. So I did feel like if, you know, there was room to back off on the focal length just a little bit here to keep this duck off the edge of the frame, it might make it a little stronger. I also thought it'd be really neat to see the mama duck. You can tell she's sitting right back here, you know, in the shadow. And if the focal length was backed off just a bit, you could see the full reflection of the duck's heads as well as potentially the mom here in the background. I'm not sure though, if you backed off that much, you might end up losing that, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, somebody help me out here. That intimacy. Yeah, the intimacy with the baby ducks right here is just really outstanding. It just makes you feel like you're right there with them, you know. One's almost looking at the camera. And the other one, is he eating something? It's hard to tell. So yeah, I really would like to see the mom as part of the overall composition. But otherwise, it really felt like a strong image. And again, it was hard to, you know, I had several images. I think I'd picked 8 images in the Scarlet category as I ranked them, and then I had to move several to honorable mention, and this is one that I ended up pushing down to honorable mention. All right.
This is Downtown Construction by Sandy Siegel.
Yes. Ohio, I think we're known as the construction or the orange barrel state. If we had a state mascot, it would be the orange barrel. I love the geometry in this. You know, it really looks like there was a lot of thought put into the framing of this image. The verticals, you know, as best I could tell, were really lined up very well. I wish I'd had, you know, I should have pulled it into Lightroom so I could have used the grid to see, but it looks like it was corrected based upon these being the verticals and this being the horizontals. And then the one thing I noted was because this pipe is so much closer to the camera, it ends up being a little off kilter relative to the vertical. So you see the brick over here. I might have considered cropping in just a little bit over here so you don't have the brick in this corner of the frame. But I loved how each one of these little squares almost told its own story in this picture. There's a different sense and a different feel as you look at each one of them. They're all in like different stages of that construction process. And you got a work table set up here and a bunch of supplies here. And the color and tone was really controlled well. I can see, you know, that there was definitely some adjustments done to help balance things out overall. And I think that was handled really well in this image. Let's see, what do I have in my notes here? Each square tells its own story. Yeah, the bigger context of all those squares kind of, you know, goes along with the different points in the process of the construction process. Light's well balanced and controlled. And the up and down and the verticals are well thought out here. So overall, a very strong image. And it definitely feels like it could be taken in Ohio if you spend any time downtown.
Okay, this is Cafeteria Line by David Chu.
No, I didn't realize that. I picked two of his. So on one hand, I was torn with this image because we do have the wilds in Ohio, and I guarantee, well, I bet that this was taken at the wilds. So literally could have been taken in Ohio. But when I look at it, I don't think anything about Ohio. And so that's really kind of what kept this image out of the top 5. Because I really do like the image overall. I love the way the stripes line up on the image. It's got a very nice geometric feel to it. In this case, instead of the lines going toward the corner, they come in from the sides. It feels very well balanced. And it does feel like it tells a story to me. The different zebras are all kind of getting ready in their line of, you know, feeding time. So it was a good use of the stripes and the darkness. I had a hard time deciding if this was darkened or done in post, or if it was naturally done some way, but I really feel like it had to have been done in post. There's a slight bit of fringing down here, which kind of gives it away potentially, but otherwise it was very well controlled on the edges of the zebra. It looks like a lot of time and thought was put into this image. And I could appreciate that looking at that, especially as a photographer. And thinking about photography, I talked about the Columbus Arts Festival earlier on. And one thing I remember talking to another person at the judging, because you can go see the judging. And I would highly suggest anybody who's interested in competitions to go to their jury process once we get out of this whole COVID mess. Go and sit through the jury process and watch, you know, how they do their judging. It's really insightful stuff. But what one person said to me is, what often judges well doesn't necessarily sell well at an art festival. And what sells well doesn't necessarily judge well either. So you're always stuck in that kind of conundrum of, you know, if you want to get into this in more of a commercial aspect or a fine arts aspect, finding images that don't necessarily appeal to you, but appeal to other people and their senses of photography. You know, I was looking at some of the images that from last month's competition, and I might have picked totally different images than last month's judges, because every person comes into it with their own concept of how they, you know, want to think about those things. In that same judging process, because of the Emerging Artist Program, they actually give you the judges' notes and score if you're in the Emerging Artist Program. There was one photographer that year who judged as a judge. And on a scale of 1 to 7, that photographer gave me a 2. All the other judges scored me above a 5. But none of the other judges were photographers. They were, you know, clay and fabric and glass and other different art genres. So, you know, we as photographers often look at images very differently than other people will.
This is Carolina Wren by Donnie Robertson.
Yeah, so I really felt this image had good color and contrast, especially between the subject and the background. You know, the foreground and the subject is primarily browns and oranges, you know, with the background being that green tone, especially because the background is very well blurred out. It was, you know, a well chosen aperture for this image. The bird is nice and sharp, especially in the beak and the eye. And it really maintains that sharpness pretty well until you get back into the tail area, which, you know, given the depth of the bird and the angle of it relative to your focal plane is a challenging thing to accomplish. You can definitely tell from the wood texture here, you know, that focal plane was really centered right on the eyeball. I like that the bird in this image is offset more toward the left third line and looking into the blank space of the right side. It creates a nice sense of balance to the overall image. Yeah, good aperture choice. Provides a nice blur in the position. Okay, I said all that stuff. Sorry, just referencing my notes here. You know, I love taking pictures of birds. They're a challenging lot to sit still. Carolina wrens especially are one of the hardest ones. They love to move around. And so getting a nice sharp image like this is a real challenge. And I really appreciated that they were able to capture him with this really nice feather detail.
Okay, now we're done with the honorable mentions. This is 5th place, Cedar Bog by Bruce Goldsmith.
Yeah, so I looked at this image a couple times as I was judging them, and I really enjoyed the softness that was applied on this image. I often push the texture and clarity in my images, especially my nature images, and this image just went in an entirely different direction, and it gives it a very fine art kind of feel. You know, it has a very warm, inviting feel to it, almost like a daydream on a nice sunny afternoon with the blue sky and the white clouds. Yeah, it feels like a very fine art photograph. The one thing I did feel, it doesn't really have a defined subject, you know, which isn't always required in photography. But this foreground area felt a little busy to me, and really kind of like, I love the symmetry in the tree trunks here, and these foreground branches kind of distracted from that up and down feeling. You know, I ranked it 5th. I might have moved it up a little bit in the list, you know, if the foreground didn't feel quite as busy. But, you know, overall, I felt like that was a minor thing, that it was a really strong image.
This is Backyard Bee, fourth place by Sue Day.
Yeah, I actually have an image that's very similar to this. These bees are not easy to get to sit still, and to get that level of detail is a real challenge. Um, I really appreciated the focus being right on the eyes and the front of the head, the real crisp mandibles. I like that the focus falls off toward the back where some of the sun is highlighting the fur. It really created a nice little bokeh of the pollen grains that are on the fur all around there. The one thing I did feel is that this green leaf here covering the leg was a little distracting on the image. You know, that's just a challenge based on where your subject chooses to sit for you when you're trying to take that photograph. You know, you're not always able to get them to pose the way you want them to pose, or to reframe them before they fly off to somewhere else. So not a huge detractant overall, but it's in very crisp focus because it's on a similar focal plane with the eyeball. So it sort of pulls my attention away sometimes from the bee. But then at the same time, it kind of pushes you back over, you know, as you're coming back through the image. Again, I like that the bee's offset, not right in the center of the frame, but his body's coming off toward the right side there. And he's looking toward the space on the left side here. All right. I'm looking at the time here. I got to keep talking.
This is third place, Early Morning Flight by Rick Bartelt.
Yeah, so birds in flight, again, are a really challenging thing to capture. I really like the timing of this photograph, that they were caught just before they caught into the bright flare of the sun. The fog really helped to create a nice warm tone on this first group of birds, you know, that kind of falls off as you go back toward the other ones. The fact that it's so early and the shutter speed still fast enough to keep the wings relatively frozen, it creates a nice story, you know, of the movement from bird to bird to bird. They're flying along on the lower third line here. The sun's lined up on this third line over here, and the top of the trees are almost touching that upper third line. So it feels very well balanced overall. I really love the warm tone. The one thing I would think about doing would be to might correct out or do something about this flare coming up here. It does balance with the light on the water, but I feel like it pulls me out of the frame a little bit. That might be a hard thing to correct for. I often find trying to get rid of those kind of things is real challenging. But overall, a minor thing. But that might have moved it from third to second or first. Again, you know, it was hard once you get to these top ones to really choose, you know, so it came down to very minor details like that kind of influenced my decisions.
Second place is Country Church, Eric Erickson.
So I like this image because you can definitely feel like this is taken in Ohio. There's many churches like this all scattered across Ohio, you know, with the cemeteries right next to them. It's a very common scene, especially with the propane tank over here. The early fall color starting to show up in the trees is a really nice touch here. It provides a really beautiful contrast between the color of the roof and the green trees behind it. It's a really nice that it was caught at that time of year. It also helps that there's leaves on the ground, you know, to kind of break up the green and give it some texture. The stones being lined up on the diagonal is really nice, and the path coming out over here. The one thing I would note is the shadow from the light pole here, to me feels a bit distracting. I would consider removing that shadow. The object itself of the pole not being in the frame makes the shadow kind of just come out of nowhere. Having said that, it comes directly out of the corner, so it almost feels purposeful in its existence in the frame. So I was on the fence about removing that. It's one of those where, if it was me, I probably would remove it and do a virtual copy and have it in one and not in the other and compare the two. I like that the trees come in from the top of the frame, from the corners. It feels well balanced that way. And it was hard to choose between this one and this one. In this case, go ahead.
This, let me just say whose it is. It's first place is Amish Farm by Ted Stone.
So yeah, Ted. Between this one and the last one, I felt like they both represented Ohio really well. And the deciding factor for me here was the man working the horses.
Yeah, I'm glad you saw that.
That to me pushed this really right to the top. It's so easy to go out and take a picture of a farm, and just get a bunch of buildings and trees. But the fact that you're actually seeing the Amish man working the land with his horses, I couldn't tell for sure if he was working them or if he's on a buggy, but it looks like he was actually working the field potentially.
Yeah, I guess right behind the horses.
Yeah, and you can see they got the looks like they've got their girth saddles on, with some kind of implement that he was probably working out through here. It really helps to tell that story and make it, take a photograph and elevate it to like a fine art photograph. And I really appreciated that about this image. I'm not sure what's going on up here in the field, if that was a sensor dust or something. That dark spot seems really out of place. Because everything else in the image, seems very natural, well controlled. I might consider, cloning that out. That was the one slight distraction, but it wasn't enough of a distraction given that you caught the farmer there in the image. The beautiful white farmhouse contrasted with the red barn and the gray silo was just a beautiful context to the image.
Yeah, that's just not too far from Berlin.
Mm-hmm. And I like that you seem to have lined this guy up here toward the third line. The one thing, if I'm a proponent for subjects that are part, what I would consider of the main subject, not touching the frame. So if you could get a little wider and keep the house over here inside the frame, I would love to see an image like that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, catching the farmer in there, that was the coup de grace.
Okay, well, congratulations to all of the winners. And Ken has chosen a few images that he wants to make some suggestions for how they could possibly be improved. I'm not going to read the titles or the names of these, so if you just want to go through them, Ken, that'd be fine.
Yeah. One last thing I would wonder is, did you straighten this for the edge of the barn? It looks like the silo leans slightly left, but it wouldn't surprise me if the silo was naturally leaning a little bit left. It looks like it's really old. Because I felt like the lines on the barn looked like they were straight up and down, and the other buildings seemed to match that structure. Ted, did you?
I was using a telephoto lens, but I don't know what, can't remember what I used. And I was at an angle
Yeah.
So that can change, add a little distortion too.
Oh, and that's one of those things I always struggle with too is, how do you decide what to base that on? Because I felt like the barn itself was, that focal point, especially with the farmer coming from the corner going back into the barn area. So it seemed like that was what was up and down. And I was trying to decide if this was naturally leaning to the left.
Well, you know what? It does look straight along the edge though.
Yeah, it does seem that way. It's hard to tell without the Lightroom grid to place it on. But overall, yeah, wonderful image. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So,
I might
Scarlett?
make a suggestion. The Amish area is so interesting. You could spend a whole day just taking the back roads and see what you run into. And you always find good pictures.
Oh yeah. I often just drive out through the countryside and see what I find. I love doing that.
Especially in the Amish area, because they keep their farms in such, excellent.
Pristine. Yeah, they keep them in really good shape. And they keep them very authentic.
Oh yeah, no cars. Lots of buggies.
Okay. Let me find my notes here. Oh wait, which ones did I pick? Scarlet, okay. All right, so on this image, I liked the composition of the stream cutting across the frame and coming down toward the lower right corner. And it looked like there was some thought given into that composition overall. There were a few things here that I felt were a little distracting. The really bright highlights in this lower right corner and this upper right corner drew my attention away from the stream itself. And there appears to be a branch that's out of focus right in almost out toward the center of the frame here. I'm guessing that was close enough to the camera that you probably could have gone out there and manually remove that before taking the photo. That's something I'll often do if I'm on a scene setting up and I see little things like that that are in my way. I'll go out there and bend branches back and hold them down out of the way so that I can get my picture without having to worry about fixing something like that in post-processing. It's much easier to do that on scene a lot of times if you're able to. And given how blurred out it is, I would guess it was pretty close to you. You probably could have walked right up to it and pulled it out of the frame while taking the photo. So yeah, using some dodge and burn to really darken out these highlights and maybe even starting the image at a stop down. One of the tools I use in camera a lot is auto exposure bracketing in combination with the exposure compensation. So I'll shoot a lot of my images at either 3 or 5 stops, or 3 or 5 exposures, 1 stop or 2 stops apart. And oftentimes I'll start my exposure compensation at, maybe -1, -2. So that my final images might be at a -5 or a -7 stops. And then when I get home, I'll look at all those images and choose the image that has my favorite starting point. And a lot of times I might even blend those images into an HDR or pick 3 or 4 of the images to blend. I don't always blend all of them. I might just pick the middle of the series or 2 of the images. You never have to choose all the images you had originally. So yeah, trying to darken these areas while keeping this area here through the center light and darkening over here a little bit would really draw your attention into the water. And I think would make that a stronger image overall. Ah, yes. I think if you look on my website, you'll probably see multiple copies of this image or a very similar image to it. This one almost ended up an honorable mention. You know, it was obviously taken in Ohio. Let's see, downtown lines. Wait a minute, what's the name of this one? No, okay, sorry. I gotta line up my notes here. So yeah, this is the classic Columbus skyline composition taken from the Main Street Bridge, because you can see the Ridge Street Bridge in front here. Let's see. So in this case, I felt like the light and the highlights are very well controlled. The marquees on the building were pretty well exposed, except for the Fifth Third building. And I'll be honest, the Fifth Third building and the US Bank building are the most difficult marquees in the downtown Columbus skyline to get properly exposed. Choosing just at this tail end of sunset helped to bring that color in here, and get it with the lights on was a nice touch. But looking at this, the buildings definitely feel like they're leaning in toward the center, especially the ones on the outer edges of the frame here. The Park National Bank and the AEP building could definitely do with a perspective correction. In Lightroom, there's a vertical slider you can use, and it does a wonderful job of correcting for an image like this, as well as an auto perspective adjustment is usually very good on these types of images. It does a pretty darn good job of finding and getting your buildings nice and straight for you. It's something I've used a lot, but if it doesn't get it just right, go to that vertical slider and you can fine tune. Because when you take that wide angle picture, you can almost guarantee those buildings on the outside edge are going to lean toward the center. Often when I shoot my skylines, I use a 50mm lens prime in the portrait orientation, and I'll shoot them across that way. And that way I avoid having to do that perspective adjustment. Because as I build my final image, my buildings line up straight naturally. So yeah, the main suggestion on this would be to straighten the buildings, and that might have moved it up into the honorable mention category. Yeah, so this one I liked, the downtown lines. I didn't really feel like it represented taken in Ohio, which is why it didn't make honorable mention, but I liked the geometry and the feel of the image. The one thing I felt might make it a little stronger would be to line the stairwell up and down with the edge of the frame over here, to kind of accentuate the diagonals on the right side. When I look at this image, all the lines are diagonals. There's nothing that really kind of grounds in the vertical. The windows almost do, but they feel like they're just a little bit off too. So I really felt like playing with that geometric concept. If this concrete stairwell, which is a nice contrast to the red on both sides, lined up and down, it would really kind of balance a little bit better. You kind of got this blue here, which kind of balances in contrast with the darker colors in the windows. And then you've got the red here, which kind of balances out with the red over here. But the whole time I'm looking at the image, my head's crooked sideways, just because I want it to be a little bit straighter on this section. But again, that's just my personal opinion, and everybody has their own look and feel to an image. So dried flowers. This one had been in the honorable mention categories until I was told I had too many. And I had to go through and find the ones that I couldn't keep there. And the one thing about this image that I felt pushed it down to the ways to improve, which was kind of my honorable mention, but not quite category, was it appears that there were 3 flowers chosen to kind of be the main subject that are in this section here, but this flower here is out of focus. And given that this flower here is the closest flower to the camera and feel, drew my attention away to the fact that these 2 are super razor sharp, wonderful detail to them. So in this image, it felt like it might be improved a little bit by rotating the focal plane just enough to get this image in sharpest focus as this flower and this, what did I say, this image. Get this flower and this flower and this flower all in sharp focus. I typically feel like images like this do really well when you choose groups of 3s. And these back here are way out of focus, so they're obviously not really part of this grouping. So yeah, I felt like that would be a way to improve on this image. But I love the nice kind of brown tones, that really rich, warm tone. I loved how these 2 were really brought into nice, sharp, crisp focus. It shows all that really neat detail that's in the dried flowers there. And it really makes them stand out from the background, which is all really out of focus. So it isolates them very well, which again is why I was saddened that this one wasn't nearly as crisp as these 2. So I wondered when Donna was talking about the composites and the things, this image of Arnold here is a really quintessential image, you know, when you think of the Arnold classic. And the Levesque Tower here is, you know, a mainstay of the Columbus skyline since 1924, 29. I forget my dates exactly, but it's probably also one of my favorite buildings in the skyline to photograph. I've got many, as you can see in my galleries, of that building. So this really blends those 2 nicely. The one thing I felt like was missed, because this is obviously a composite, is that Arnold's eyes here, to me, appear to be looking toward the viewer as opposed to looking toward the Levesque Tower. And I thought to myself, if I was going to do this composite and blend 2 iconic pieces of Ohio and Columbus, I think I would choose to try to angle Arnold and move him slightly to the right and have him looking at the Levesque Tower. That might be a challenging thing to do given the angle of the photograph itself that was used as the composite may not line up on that diagonal. But again, that's one of those things I'll often go back and reshoot a scene that I've shot before, because I'll go home and look at a picture in post and think to myself, darn it, I wish when I was standing there, had thought to move 3 steps to the right to take that picture. And I'll revisit scenes and take them over again. Because even if I visualize things in my head ahead of time, sometimes I'll see something when I go back and start editing and think, you know, I can improve on this even more. And so that's where I felt like this could improve, is right now there's a lot of overlap between Arnold here and the Levesque. And there's this empty space in the sky right here. If Arnold was moved to the empty space and angled so that he was looking at the Levesque Tower, you would have these 2 subjects balancing better with each other, in my opinion. But I really also felt like it was a neat image, and definitely took some forethought to put these 2 together. Let's see, Slate Run Farm on a Perfect Day. So I really liked the concept in this image. And now I'm looking at it on my screen. I can't tell if it's soft because it's just my screen or if it was actually soft. When I looked at it on the website, it didn't seem as soft. There were a few things. I liked the concept here, but I felt there were a few areas where it kind of fell short in the potential execution. One being the road here is coming down. And again, like I said before, I like to see things like this exiting the frame right in the corner. So if it was me, I would have stepped 3 or 4 steps to the left to bring this into the corner for 2 reasons, at least 2 reasons I can think of. One is these trees right here are in front of the barn itself. And to me, it feels like this barn is the subject or the intended subject of this frame. And the trees here cover up the entrance to the barn. If the person had stepped over into the grass and shot through here towards that opening, the trees here would have moved to the side of the barn and you would have seen that opening into the barn itself. That also would have cropped out a number of these trees here, which really kind of feel like they take over the subject in this foreground area of the frame. So by moving just a couple steps over here, you'd probably also be able to keep this structure in its entirety in the frame and not have it cutting off on the edge of the frame there. You would have your road coming in from the corner and then circling into the opening, which would then be fully visible between the 2 sets of trees on either side. But having said that, I like the color, the red contrasting with the green, with the blues. The sky is really beautiful that day. The nice white puffy clouds. Overall, it's a nice image, but I just felt like it could get a little bit of improvement by moving over there and getting that framing so that you can actually see the opening without it being obstructed by these trees here. Oops, wrong button. All right. So that brings us to gray improvements. All right. So yes, we had a couple bees. I like this bee in terms of the detail of the bee. I like that it was not directly centered in the frame, but moved offset a little bit. The main issue I think I had with this image is the yellow is just so vibrant. It's so vibrant that it makes me want to put my sunglasses on. It overpowers the bee as the subject and steals focus from the bee itself. I keep finding myself pulled away from the bee into this really bright area right here. I would consider using a vignette or some localized radial filters to try to darken this background, or even a graduated filter in Lightroom would be an easy way to drag it in from the corner and just drop the exposure and the highlights in this back area to keep your focus on the foreground here. The other thing would be, choose a different flower. The yellow of the bee or the yellow of the flower really kind of almost matches some of the hair in the bee, and the two of them almost get lost in each other. Finding a different colored flower, like a pink flower or a pink or a blue, would really allow the bee to become the star of the image overall. But that I do appreciate the rich, vibrancy in the color and the detail in the bee. And did I make any other notes here? There we go. Oh, I guess I don't have notes on that. Okay. Let's see. So here in this one, I had this one up in the honorable mentions and had to move it down. I really liked in this one that the leaves in the background cut across the frame at the diagonal. The bee itself is offset on the third line over here. It's moving in the direction of this flower, of the pink flower. You know, it's nice and sharp, good detail on the hair, and the antenna of the bee, as well as the pollen on the head. It really does shine as the star of the frame. The one thing I would say to try to improve on this would be I'd like to see more of the pink flower. Maybe pull it, again, it's a bee in flight, so you're really limited in terms of framing when you start trying to get moving subjects like bees in flight, birds in flight. And having attempted that many times myself, some successful, some not so successful, I can appreciate that the bee itself is in good sharp focus and lined up where it is. But that's where the one thing I would say is to improve on it would be to try and get more of the flower itself in the frame. But again, that's a relatively minor thing overall. I did like that the wings are relatively in focus. As it's in flight, you know those things are moving fast, so it was definitely a good fast shutter speed to capture a little bit of detail in the wings. Yeah, so again, I mean, almost in the honorable mention category, but I had to make some tough choices at points, and this is one of those. Let me find my notes here. I'm in the wrong section. Gray. Here we go. Let's see. So I've got remember to hydrate. Yeah, so the image here is nicely framed and captures a really intimate moment in the eagle's daily life. You know, you can see he's just down at the water getting a drink of water. You can see the water, or the water droplets coming off his beak as he's lifted his head up right out of the water. And so in this one, I felt like the feather detail was a little soft. And that was one thing that kind of held me back from pushing it further. Getting the detail on the bird's feathers is difficult, and it was shot at 1/1000th of a second at a 500 millimeter focal length, so it exceeds the shutter speed to focal length factor by 2. So in that case, it feels like maybe the lens paired up with the D850 just wasn't providing enough resolution power, which I ran into when I bought my Z7, my Sigma 150 to 600. I kept getting images like this where they just didn't impress me. They just had a lack of sharpness and detail at the extreme focal lengths. So to me, that was really the only thing holding this back. The only other thing I felt like is the background is really dark. And some of the detail on the bird really kind of got lost in the background. Finding a way to separate, you know, this dark feather from this dark subject might have helped to improve the image overall. It looks like those are tree branches maybe, or roots in the background. It's hard to tell for sure, but that's where getting something with a contrasting color could have helped to improve the image overall. But overall, I did really like this image. Yes, I in fact think there's a picture of me similar to this image. So the Steel Highway. I'm going to make this as a public service announcement. Don't be that guy, and don't be this photographer. I love the image. Don't get me wrong. You know, the thought, the way it's lined up, you can tell. You know, somebody was thinking of this image. But train tracks are a very dangerous place to be. I know this bridge well. I worked downtown for 17 plus years. and was downtown almost every day until COVID hit. I know the schedules of the trains that go over this bridge, and they are relatively frequent. This is a very long bridge, and if you get caught out here when there's a train coming through, there are very few places to go and very many ways to end up in trouble. There happen to be several support structures you can climb down onto in an emergency, but I'd highly recommend not doing this. So I was really torn. I probably would have put this higher in my rankings and honorable mentions or higher, except for the subject matter being railroad tracks. I think we hear a lot of that in photography about, models on railroad tracks and the danger it poses. I've heard about people getting hurt, so it's definitely something you take a real risk when you do something like this, and it's something I can't recommend anybody else do.
Ken, I took this. I'm Richard Marquardt, but
Yeah.
Where I was standing, I could see, I was just on rocks with the regular railroads, and
Yeah.
these were two homeless people that were using this as their road. I just thought it told a story of them, following this as their highway, being homeless. But
Yeah, and you're right. It tells a story like that, which is, that's why I still put it in here.
Yeah.
And like I said, I wanted to put it higher, but I felt like the subject matter was the way to improve. And I know where you're standing exactly, and where you are, there are ways to get out of danger quicker.
Oh, I only had to
You
walk
only had to step over to the side of the tracks,
I only had to step over a couple of rails and some rocks and could get off quickly. So I
Yeah,
could see 200 yards in both directions. So I was in no danger.
true. And I've been here before. I've been here before, so.
That's all right, Rich. You did a good job.
I would never walk out where they are, if that's what you're saying. So
Yeah, I didn't know if you knew those people or not. If you were taking this, if you had somebody walk out there to take the picture.
no,
or you were just taking a picture of somebody who happened to be there already. But
I was took out just to take a picture of the railroad track like that and stuff, and just happened to be a couple of homeless people walk by that I said hello to, and then took the picture of them walking across. I had never seen them before in my life.
yeah, and it's a really nice and well composed image. But you see this curve here off to the left at the end of the tracks. That goes around the corner, and you can't see the trains when they're coming, and you can't hear them very much sooner than you see them. And they come across these tracks, I think, doing about 20 to 25 miles an hour, typically. And they will outrun you faster than you can run down these tracks. Let me tell you. I've spent a lot of time downtown, so I've had my opportunities to see them.
I appreciate it. I'm old and have double hip replacements. And I can get out of there in plenty of time, but anyway,
Yeah.
I appreciate your comments.
Yeah, I do like that you put this in black and white. I feel that really helps to bring your attention up to these guys. And again, I feel like the only reason holding it back is it's the railroad tracks. But overall, a nice image.
Thanks.
And I think that's all I had.
Okay, well, Ken, we really, really appreciate you agreeing to judge for us tonight. And I can tell you put a lot of time and thought into everything. And I know people appreciate, when people spend time on these things rather than just sort of pick out the one they like the best. So.
Yeah, these are all my notes.
Oh, okay.
I actually had to pare it down because when you said you're going to tell me how many to pick, and then I didn't hear, so I just started picking. And
I know.
I ended up with more than you intended. So. Again, it was really hard to choose. There were a lot that I wanted to include, and I couldn't because the
limitations. Yeah.
Limitations. So.
Yeah. Donna, I don't know. Are you still here?
I am still here.
Okay. Do you have any comments, or you want to close the meeting?
Well, good night, everybody. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. Sorry. Thank you so much, Ken. I really, really appreciate your
Yeah.
time and the thoughtfulness you've put into everything, really, in your comments. So thank you very much appreciated.
You're welcome.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I don't have anything else. Does anybody else before we end?
Thanks, Ken.
You're
All
welcome.
right. Thanks, everybody. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas,
Christmas.
everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Stay healthy.
See
Yeah.
you next year.
And a
Thank
happy
you, Ken.
You're
You're welcome.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Thank you. Merry Christmas, everybody.